Mayor, you know what? I'm gonna have to go to another location. I can't. Emily, can you start the meeting with the call to order and the pledge and the roll? Thank you.
Sure. I am going to find the handout of the thing I have to read. I call this August 17th meeting of the Somerville School Committee to order pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the governor's March 15th order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, as well as Mayor Curtitone's declaration of emergency dated March 15th, 2020. This meeting of the Somerville School Committee will be conducted via remote participation. We will post an audio recording, audio video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive recording record of these proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the City of Somerville website and local cable access government channel. Do a vote or do the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay. No flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, individual, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Superintendent, will you call the roll?
Certainly. Dr. Phillips?
Here.
Ms. Krepshin?
Here.
President McLaughlin? Mayor Curtatone?
Present.
Mr. Green?
Here.
Ms. Barish?
Here.
Ms. Patone?
Present.
Dr. Ackman?
Here.
And Ms. Norman, who we know is here, but not quite here yet. We have a quorum.
Okay. We're going to start with public comment. I know for the past couple of meetings, we have had pretty copious public comment, but we're going to, that was to get some input into our plans. The district, or we're now reverting to what we do more standard practice, where we're going to take 10 people for public comment. And then if there is more public comment, if you signed up before the 7 p.m. start time, there will be public comment again once the rest of the content of the meeting has happened. Chair Norman, do you feel prepared?
I believe I am back and on a different Wi-Fi, and I'm so sorry, but this is the world that we're living in. And I want to welcome and thank everyone for attending tonight's meeting of the school committee. Tonight we'll be discussing two important components of reopening schools. First, the district will present the models, which may change as we continue to collaborate with the unions, receive further guidance from the state, and get more information about the buildings and the health metrics to make decisions about safety. And the full report will be released, this Wednesday at 5 o'clock. The school committee will be voting on the plan next Monday, the 17th. And then after we have that presentation, we will be taking up the revised calendar for the 2021 school year. It seems we have less than 10 people signed up, so thank you for explaining that, Dr. Ackman, that we're going to go back to no more than 20 minutes initially and going back to our policy, but I think we're in good shape for that. And I really want to thank our students who have spoken up, our families and staff for their continued robust engagement, and a huge thank you to the Somerville Public Schools staff for your continued and devoted work on behalf of our students. It's really been an incredible thing to see and participate in. And I'd also like to thank our community and city partners, including the REC, Health and Human Services, DPW, Infrastructure and Assessment Management, and the mayor. This has certainly been a collaborative effort. So with that, can we have the first speaker, I believe was Elizabeth, and when you come up to the, when you're unmuted and you're asked to speak, can you give your name and your address, please?
Elizabeth, you are now unmuted. You need to unmute yourself.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Janiak. I'm a public health researcher at Harvard Medical School, where I'm an assistant professor. I also teach at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and I live at 43 Springfield Street. To promote the physical and mental health of children, families, and the broader Somerville community, it is imperative that in-person learning resumes as soon as possible for as many learners as possible. However, we all know that some students are more adversely impacted by virtual instruction than others. Critically, this includes students grades K through 3, not K through 2, but K through 3. The National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine recently issued a report, Reopening K-12 Schools During the COVID-19 Pandemic, Prioritizing Health, Equity, and Communities. A national panel of 12 independent experts, including public health scholars, academic experts on educational policy, and practicing elementary education leaders, conducted an exhaustive review of evidence weighing the risks against the benefits of resuming in-person instruction. As this panel observes, quote, elementary age children may struggle with distance learning. This is the case especially for children in grades K to 3, who are still developing the skills needed to regulate their own behaviors and emotions, maintain attention, and monitor their own learning. In addition, the long-term consequences of being unable to make adequate progress through distance learning may be more severe for students in grades K to 3 than for older students. Of note, because of the inconsistent and generally low quality of distance learning in the spring of 2020, our rising third graders are starting well behind grade level due to the lack of learning from March through the end of their second grade year, a full third of second grade missed. Simultaneously, the risk of viral transmission by children in grades 3 and below is very low. You have heard this data point before. A large new study of 60,000 contacts in South Korea found that only 5% of children ages 9 and less contract COVID when someone in their own home is infected, less than half of the overall rate of infection among household contacts. Children in homes with their parents 24 hours a day in lockdown, sharing food and dishes and every household service, barely ever contracted the novel coronavirus that causes COVID-19. The risk of transmission in schools with proper social distancing, enhanced hygiene, and universal masking is surely incredibly low overall, and particularly among children ages 9 and younger. Somerville must prioritize in-person learning for students pre-K through grade 3, along with other vulnerable learners. Thank you.
Thank you. Next was Jose. Jose, did you want to? Catherine, are you able to unmute him?
Carrie, it looks like he may have left the meeting. He's no longer listed.
Okay.
You can move on to Leonor.
Leonor, please, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Leonor Hillerstrom, and I live at 22 Cameron Avenue. My oldest son is a rising first grader with Down syndrome in the Inclusion Pilot Program at the West. I'm also the secretary of the CPAC. CPAC facilitated a town hall last Thursday night with over 100 concerned parents. Many shared that remote learning didn't work for their children with special needs and that they regressed. Our families want to know how the district will accommodate the disruption of services and progress lost over the past 5 months. They want to know why their children won't have the in-person teaching and therapies that DESE has prioritized and our kids so desperately need. We're wondering why it is not possible for in-person services and therapies to occur outside. Many are scared and stressed about remote learning and want to know what changes will be made this fall to better meet their children's needs. Beyond wanting to share these concerns, something else has started to nag me. The district's plan to provide outdoor time for students during remote learning through community schools and the Somerville Recreation Department. When I met with the Recreation Department a year and a half ago to discuss the possibility of my son attending summer camp before kindergarten, I was told he would need a one-to-one aid, either provided by the district or by ourselves. When I contacted the districts, they said they couldn't provide an aid for a recreation program. Last fall, I pulled my son from the after-school program at the West because they didn't have the staff and resources to adequately support his toilet training plan and his behavior plan. No parent should have to pick up their child from after school and see them sitting alone and soaked in their own urine. I hope that the district will come to an agreement with community schools and their recreation department to provide outdoor time for all students during remote learning. I want to stress how difficult it will be for our families to be excluded from outdoor time with their peers while also not receiving any in-person services and therapies. This is an opportunity to prioritize our most struggling learners and make systemic change. Thank you.
Next, we have Sarah Campbell.
Hello.
Sarah, you're all set?
Sarah, we can hear you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Sarah Campbell. I live at 18A Charles Street, and I'm the parent of a rising first grader. First, I agree with Superintendent Skipper's statement at one of the August town halls that teachers are essential. They're an essential part of our children's lives, our community, and the social safety net. And while I realize that teachers, like all of us, did not foresee a future pandemic when they decided to become teachers, the same is true for many other essential workers, including factory workers, truck drivers, and grocery store employees. Second, while I was glad to hear in previous meetings that you are prioritizing the needs of the youngest, English language learners, and special needs students, I've yet to see any detail on what this prioritization amounts to. Given that students under the age of 10 are less likely to transmit the virus, I ask you to consider a shorter quarantine separation distance and an earlier return to classrooms for these young students. Third, like many families in the area, both my husband and I work full-time and do not have family nearby. This means that a remote or hybrid options are difficult for us, and for many of the accommodations related to Zoom school put more pressure on us as parents to take on roles which we do not have the bandwidth or preparation to do. We love our children and we appreciate the relationship we have with them as parents. Expecting us to teach in ways which we do not know how will put a strain on that relationship and hinder their learning. My family is in a position where we can hire someone to watch our children as we work full-time, but we must recognize that without in-class instruction, there will be children in Somerville who will be left home alone, not because anyone wants to do this, but because parents are given an impossible choice. I have heard that there will be programs through the rec department for children during the day, but this provides new complications. How many students can be supported by these programs? How long will the programs be in terms of duration per sign-up? And over the year, where will they be located? And if they're primarily outdoors, what happens when it rains? Will the staff be mandatory reporters? How can children participate while also attending Zoom school? I realize you are trying to figure out many of these details, but it seems as though this rec program is a dodge to avoid having teachers interact with students. Thank you for your time.
And last, we have Rebecca. Was it Rebecca Inzana? Yes.
It is.
Thank
it
you.
is.
I'm here.
Carrie, and after Rebecca, we have one more, Carrie. It's going to be Karina Johansson.
Thank you. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I look forward to the day when we can begin this hybrid model of which you speak for our most vulnerable. There are many more pieces and stakeholders, involved that we need to collaborate with and so forth. So when this does happen, I want to make sure that we're ready when the actual stars align, however they need to align. And we don't really understand a lot about what metrics specifically you're looking for. City and state infection rates, the building ventilation, you know, and maybe other things that we're not aware of. But when that actually happens, we need to make sure that the plans that the building return to school building committees are actually completed. And my concern today is that without a deadline for the back to school committees of each school to submit something, that people are going to continue to drag their feet. You know, I want to hope that the committees are sitting to be able to have productive conversations and to move agendas forward, but understanding that there is tension there, and having some clear deadlines of when each school should be submitting those plans to whomever they're submitting them to would be really helpful to make sure that we can all get on the same page so that we're ready whenever the metrics say that we can actually return to school. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And last is Karina.
It's Karina Johansson next, and we're gonna circle back to Jose Santos, who is logged back on. So
Thank you.
Karina, then Jose, and then we are all set for public comment.
Thank you.
Karina, you're good to go.
Hi, may I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, my name is Karina Johansson. I live at 23 Charnwood Road in Medford, and I'm a teacher at the East Somerville. Wanted to point out that I'm a teacher at East Somerville where many families do not speak English, and ask if these meetings are being translated in Spanish as they are desperate for this information as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we are now circling back to Jose. Is that correct, Ms. Santiago?
That is correct.
Okay.
Jose, you are self-muted. If you unmute yourself, you're good to go to make your comment. Jose, it looks like you're unmuted. If you could hear me, if you could say a few words.
Jose, are you there? I'm not sure.
Okay, well, I will try to work with him via messaging. We'll skip it for now.
Okay. And we are, so that concludes public comment. We will have public comment next week. As I stated earlier, because of the amount of work to be presented and discussed, again, next week we will also, depending on the number of people who sign up, go back to our typical policies and have 20 minutes of public comment at the beginning, the bulk of the meeting, and then resume public comment. So I just didn't want to catch anyone by surprise. And if anyone wanted to delve a little bit more into it, I think our policies are also in the, what do you call it? The handouts. So without further ado, Superintendent Skipper, so under, this says school reopening update, and so there's two components. There'll be a presentation about reopening, and then after that we will take up the question of the 2021 calendar. Superintendent Skipper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Mr. Mazza, I believe, is going to put up the presentation. Sharing out his screen.
I can see the presentation on mine. Can you guys not see his screen being shared?
I can see it. If there was a way to have it be the full screen, Mr. Mazza, and not so that it would be larger for all of us to see, that would be helpful.
Yeah, hang on one second.
Okay.
Knowledge is always great when it works seamlessly.
And again, welcome to the almost 250 people, the 254 people joining us tonight. And we're happy to have you with us.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. So, so thank you to the school committee and to those of the public that are watching. I want to start off by just acknowledging what a complex process this has been and continues to be. You know, between the variations of guidance, how often the guidance has come, not often in a timely manner, with missing things like statewide metrics, statewide information around buildings and how we should be looking at building health. It has placed a lot back onto the locals. And, you know, we are blessed in our city and have come together with our district and our city agencies to try to make this work to the best of our ability. You know, we have had a reopening committee that has been in place since June, in which the city and the district work together on a weekly basis. We have a newly formed environmental and health safety committee that really is trying to look at the health and safety protocols and drill deeper down for our health educators. We've had grade span groups and committees who have met during the summer to identify through guiding questions best recommendations based on what's happening out in the field. So making it both a research project as well as a recommendation for us. Our cabinets and our principals have worked tirelessly. And then we've had our staff, our educators who have been involved in a variety of PD, and through that PD also been giving a lot of feedback. With all of that, you know, schools are not pandemic proof, and there's no process right now in this that it's going to be perfect. But what we've tried to do is to commit to make the best decisions on the information that we have at that moment, and that using our guiding values to continue to come back to the community with additional information as we get it and as we make additional decisions. And that really has framed our planning process and will going forward. Chad, in terms of our guiding values, for those that have attended the town halls before, they've heard us speak to these, but really we've been grounded in 4 sets of values. The first always being health and safety. You'll hear the mayor and myself and the chair speak of this often. And that is prioritizing the health and welfare of our students, our staff, and our families. And in the midst of a pandemic, we cannot keep that anywhere but at the center of our thinking in the decisions we make. But in this, we've also focused on student progress, and as is very routine for us, this is about the whole child. So that isn't just progress on the academic side, but it's also progress in social emotional and their physical well-being. And so all of those things have had to be considered, not only in the emergency closure, but now in this reopening plan. Everything we've done has been and continues to be through a lens of equity. You know, we know that COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted our community here in Somerville and our school communities with sickness, with a lot of mobility around living arrangements, food insecurity, access to healthcare and medicine. So lots of ways over and above just the remote nature of the education in the spring has really led to a real disproportionate impact. And so really in thinking of the reopening, we're really trying to address those issues. Not that we can make them all go away, but at least do our part to mitigate what we can. And then finally, a healthy process. And this is one in where oftentimes in making a decision that can feel right for one group, it does not feel right for another group. And
Mary, you're
to
fading
be honest
in and
and
out.
transparent and inclusive. Sorry, is to be you know, transparent and inclusive and honest in how we get our feedback and what is the process that goes into our decision making. And so I think you'll see that these guiding values are something that we're using and will continue to use throughout our planning process. Next slide. Next slide, Chad.
It's up? No?
No, next one slide. Key factor slide, Chad.
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay.
Can you not see it?
If there's a delay, it must be my, it's okay. So just in terms of the key factors, as we talk through those, I think we've talked a lot about, the DESE guidelines. And while I'd like to thank DESE for the guidance it has given, because I think that they do work hard on it. I think that much of it has come late, and in that lateness, it has caused us to be late as other districts in trying to put the pieces together. That said, we're doing our best to look at the guidelines and to see how the guidelines can inform our plans. Also, there's a great deal, since this is a pandemic, that orients around our health guidance, access, and processes for testing, which we've considered from the start to be a key element of a healthy plan, and certainly medical and scientific evidence. So I know our mayor would like to speak to this.
Thank you, Superintendent. And I'm sorry, some of the presentation where I'm at, it's just my reception. I apologize. I don't have video access. It was a little broken up. I think it's on my end. But yes, from there, and I know Rich Raish, the Director of Infrastructure Asset Management, is present on the meeting tonight, as well as Doug Kress, Director of HHS. And they'll go into more detail, but in general, the two components we are primarily focused on is making sure the building assets, the fiscal plant, meet an operational standard that ensures health and safety of our school population, teachers, staff, and students, as well as mitigates any risk of transmission from person to person. As the public knows, and everyone knows from previous presentations, we've engaged an engineering firm. We've done analysis, and a report will be forthcoming. On the testing side, the good news is that plan is evolving. We feel confident we'll be presenting a surveillance testing plan. We've engaged and are close to finalizing an agreement with certain partners on the lab site, as well as our engagement with Cambridge Health Alliance. Currently, what we're really focused on is what the sampling size would be of the school population. This, again, would be for teachers, staff, and students. The sampling size and sort of the testing occurrence. And all of this is under the guise and guidance of experts we've engaged with or communicating with, and Doug Kress will get into that as well. And we're also, we'll be outlining the number of indicators we'll be looking at from the health side that will guide our decision making moving forward. We're not looking for any, and it's not advisable, and I think any expert would agree, there's no one bright line that will inform us as to how we move forward, how we accelerate in-school attendance or roll back. But there'll be several indicators we're currently outlining and developing, and that will be part of the overall plan as we're presented. Again, both Rich Raish from Infrastructure Asset Management, Doug Kress, Director of Health and Human Services, are on the call as well to go into more detail. Happy to answer any questions.
Great. And so, Doug or Rich, if you would like to say something at this point.
Thank you, Superintendent. This is Doug Kress, Director of Health and Human Services. And I think we can't emphasize enough, we are working with the experts to really come and identify our indicators that are going to help us look at this. And as the mayor briefly defined and described, there are multiple areas that we're looking at, which include looking at the environment, which is the building assets that we have, how they will meet the standards that we need to ensure the health and safety of our residents and our students. We're also looking at our testing capacities. I think one of the challenges that we have is that the testing is tight right now in our area. We're continuing to work on that and building the capacities within our community itself. I think the other thing that we want to remind our residents about and all of our parents is that we not just have to look here in Somerville, but how are we doing this in our regional? We all look at our bubbles, and our bubble is not just around Somerville, but many of our families go beyond that. So we have to look at a regional level as well when we're looking at this. And some of those things that we'll be looking at within these indicators are, the rates of positive cases that are happening on a 14-day span. We can't just look at one day because we all know that blips will happen periodically. So we really do have to look at that rolling information. And we'll be studying these on a daily basis to really look at this to understand where it is. And we're looking at the data now on a daily basis as results come in, but also as we see the positive cases that are ticking in our community, where they're happening, and who is turning positive. So there's multiple indicators that we need to look at. And I can't emphasize enough that it's not one indicator that we can look at, but it's a matrix, and it's a variety of them that will come together to help us make those decisions. With that, I can maybe hand it over to Rich if he wants to add anything about the work he's been doing around our buildings, the assets that we have there.
Sure, thanks, Doug. Yes, we've been looking in depth in all of our buildings. We have now completed the field work for all, I guess, 10 and a half buildings. At least that's one way of looking at it, if you count the mods as a half, and the elderly. And we look at, ventilation is something that is getting a lot of media attention, and there are a lot of aspects to it. Not only does the building have centralized ventilation and the capacity to increase the exchange rate of outside air and the ability to filter it, but then also on a classroom basis, and then the other spaces within the schools, what are the vent locations, and what are the airflows through that, and who does it put at risk? So we're looking at all of those things for each one of the schools. Also, the touch points, the plumbing fixtures, the door handles, the light switches, as another way of transmitting. So then from that survey, we have sort of an existing risk profile for each one of the schools and each one of the spaces in each one of the schools. And then what is in each one of those then gives us the capability to deploy different mitigation techniques to improve the safety. And those each have their own scale, from fairly easy to implement to difficult to implement. And that's the stage that we're working at right now with the consultant. They've just about populated all of the risk data for the existing conditions, and we're now populating the options for each one of those spaces, and in a way that we can then digest it. And then in terms of the report, what we decided on, rather than some long description of each one of the buildings, it's more in a spreadsheet type of basis. So at a glance, you can kind of get an idea of what the risks are, what the options are, and we'll be moving forward from there and making the decisions and what we can deploy quickly to improve safety, and then maybe shorten the time before we can go back in person, and then for a longer range, improve the safety overall. So again, as Doug and the mayor said, I'm happy to stay on and answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, so just to thank all of our city partners, I just, in talking with other districts and other superintendents, it's been pretty amazing to see the depth at which we've tackled this, recognizing right from the start that issues around having a testing system up and running, being able to work with health partners and the health commission around metrics, and certainly the buildings, that these would be priorities right from the beginning. And so we feel very good that we're already into these areas, we're already working on plans in these areas, and that's really because of the hard work of our city partners. So thank you. Other things that we've factored in, we've really taken this on as a research project in terms of emerging best practices. Staff have done this, our cabinet and our principals have done this to really try to identify what's working where relative to remote learning and relative to hybrid learning. We do always remember that we have a unique context in Somerville, particularly for our community, and the impact of our density and the impact that the COVID-19 has had on our families and staff that we're already aware of, and factoring that in relative to things like our social emotional supports that we need to provide, and that, from the safety standpoint, that we need to be extra safe given the density of our city and how full our schools are. So we really try to take the local context into our planning as well. From the start, it was clear that in the DESE models, there'd be a need for adaptability. Adaptability because of the virus, that sometimes you would be all remote and sometimes you would be in person in a hybrid, and you would need to be able to move back and forth across those models fairly seamlessly and fairly quickly, depending on what happens relative to the virus in the community. And then finally, union considerations. This is the idea of remote teaching and teaching in a hybrid are changes of conditions. It's a different way of teaching, different way of learning. And so we really and a different way of performing a lot of the different services across our unions. So really having collaborative and deep conversations with each of our unions to identify what those changes look like and how we might best collaborate and come to resolution through negotiations has been underway and will continue to be underway. Next, please. So just to remind everyone, from the DESE planning side, which is the report that the extension that's been given to all districts is to the 10th. In our case, and in some districts' cases where the school committee was meeting on that Monday, it's been extended to actually the 17th. But really what was asked of us in the planning was to examine 3 models, one being a full in-person, everyone came back, how would that be? A full remote where the learning is taking place entirely remotely, and that usually this is facilitated or done through a learning management system, one of the systems that has pre-populated full curriculum that's aligned to the standards and is asynchronous in nature, and then finally hybrid, which is of course the model that we've been developing and following. Ours is a phased hybrid, but this is one that allows for both in-person and remote components and the ability to be able to go back and forth between them, all depending on the conditions of safety to do so. So these are the 3. Pretty much right from the beginning, we had a lot of concerns around the full in-person, looking at the size of our classrooms, looking at the size of our classes, and looking at the 3-foot and the 6-foot measure. Our feeling was in conferring with the city and with health that 6-foot was really the measure we needed to use. And as such, there was no way to bring all of the students in person back in using the 6-foot social distance. Also with us, we have transportation needs for our English language learners and our special education students. Those same social distance guidelines apply to the buses. And so in some cases, it reduces the bus capacity from 77 down to high 20s, low 30s, so basically a third of the capacity. And that means from the transportation side, it would be very difficult to transport all of the students in full in-person model. So we've indicated this to DESE in our initial feedback, and we've chosen to focus on our phased hybrid in full remote, recognizing that for some students and families, the full remote, more asynchronous model will be something that they want to pursue. Next one. So in terms of the choice, really what we're looking at are 2 choices. And the first is the one that we are strongly suggesting. It's our main model that we are orienting around, and that is our phased hybrid model, which will begin in all remote learning. And this is the one that we feel, working in partnership with our educators, that we're able to really support fully in a way that looks much different from how it did in the spring, and is able to address many of the concerns that parents shared with us, educators shared with us. This one here, again, will combine live and what we call asynchronous or independent activities and instruction, again, with far more emphasis on the synchronous live. It also is supported by our SPS teachers, and we highly recommend it as a better solution for our priority groups, such as our special education students who have moderate or significant needs, our English language learners first learning to speak English, WEDA 1 and 2, and would even say 3, and our youngest students pre-K to 2. In general, the these learning, this would be a way in which our teachers know our students, and so it will be much easier, and our curriculum, and it'll be much easier for them to be able to support our students in that hybrid model. But the option 2, which parents asked us about and we said we would explore and provide, is a full remote learning model. It wasn't until last Tuesday that the Department of Ed was able to give us information on the full remote learning models, or what we call LMSs, that the department had vetted and felt were comfortable enough with particular ones meeting the standards of Massachusetts. And so we're in the process, having just gotten the information on Tuesday, to thoroughly vet them and look at them to decide which ones might be appropriate for particular grade levels or particular students. One of them is Edgenuity, and we will provide the links for families to be able to go and look themselves at these. Edgenuity is one that we use at our high school already, so we're fairly familiar with it. Again, the key difference with these kind of full remote learning packages is that the vast majority of the instruction is asynchronous. It's not live. It's recorded lessons, often through video as a platform. Will have some limited teacher support to it, but really is intended for working independently by the student as they're able to, kind of on their own schedule. It's also designed for families. We've had families reach out to us and say, we sort of have a plan. We're going to be with 2 or 3 other families in a pod, and we feel, we have a tutor, and we feel we would much rather be able to determine our own schedule. This would be appropriate for that situation. There may be some students who have medical conditions themselves, or have a parent or a family member who have a pre-existing condition and cannot come back into school. This would be a system that we could look for that student to figure out what supports we would use to be able to help that student manage this particular LMS. So we will have more information. Mr. Mazel will go into it in the presentation, but this again, we will have more information on the full remote system over the next week or so, as we're able to spend more time with it and make sure we can give good guidance around it, both for what the strengths and the weaknesses are of each system, and what we feel we would be able to support for the students who would be fully remote using this. Again, we believe that the phased hybrid model is the model that we want to invest in. We believe it is the best for our students. Our goal is to have an in-person component, as you'll later see in the phases, when it's safe to do so, and it's with our own educators. So you'll see more on this in the coming days, but these right now will be the 2 choices for families. Next, Mr. Maza. So just to once again kind of recap, the phased hybrid is really, our main system, our main model. Again, it's allowing students to transition from the all remote learning, which is how we are beginning, when it is safe and appropriate, to some combination of in-person and remote together. During the remote learning periods in the phased hybrid, students will receive support from their teachers. They'll be assigned teachers and their teachers through live instruction and through some amount of asynchronous or independent work assignments. But really, we are trying to increase the amount of synchronous learning as feedback from the families and the educators. The full remote model, again, fits for particular student and family situations, and we're happy to have conversation to help guide if you have questions on it. Definitely for our English language learners learning English for the first time, for our special education students, severe or moderate, and for our youngest students, we wouldn't necessarily recommend that a full asynchronous system is the way to go. We think the hybrid is better. And so what I would also say is that for both of these options, we also heard loud and clear from parents the need to make sure students have the opportunity to be together and to safely do activities. So whether you're doing the phased hybrid or whether you're electing the full remote model, your student will have the opportunity to engage in the safe social interaction, mask 6-foot distance, through partnerships with the rec, community schools as we build that programming out, as well as other youth-based programs. And also we'll have access to the arts and music, which was another question. To the caller who spoke earlier, we're also working to put support systems in place, be it for rec or community schools. We're in community schools, we already have a bit of this, but for students with disabilities, of how to be able to make that unstructured time work a bit better, so that they have appropriate accommodation in it. And so there'll be more information on that to come. So the next slide is really going to begin to talk about the SPS full remote option. And so I'm going to ask our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum, Chad Mazza, to explain over the next few slides what the full remote option would look like.
Chad, we can't hear you.
Chad, you're muted.
Well, then I thought I put myself on. Okay, I'm on now. One of the things I want to point out is when we refer to testing, we are talking about COVID testing. We're not talking about MCAS testing assessments that we give in the educational setting. We're talking about COVID testing. Now, having said that, the full remote learning model with the learning management system, again, our main model is the phased hybrid with all remote to start, because we feel that that is the best model for all of our students, especially our special education students, our language learners, and our youngest learners, our pre-K to 2 students. But students who select the full remote learning model, they can stay on full remote even when conditions allow for a return to in-person learning. That is a family choice, and all families have this option. It's designed for students who want to remain only in a remote learning environment and engage in learning at their own pace, utilizing one of the learning systems that the superintendent spoke of earlier. I have a slide that will say what those are next, but again, it's with limited teacher support. So again, this option is intended for families who really want to keep their students in full remote with no in-person learning for the duration of the year. However, we will revisit this quarterly for families, so they will have an option to return to in-person when we do so. But within the fully remote learning model, the daily instruction is provided entirely through a remote platform. There is no in-person days of instruction. Students that receive instruction through asynchronous independent lessons, instructional videos, interactive lessons and activities, and engage in learning at their own pace with limited live teacher support. We are currently considering and evaluating Edgenuity, Florida Virtual School, and TECA, the Connections Academy, the Commonwealth Virtual School as possible full remote delivery systems. The option for families to shift to a different learning model being offered by SPS, be it the phased hybrid learning model or a full in-person learning model, as health and safety conditions dictate, is on a quarterly basis. So there are options for families who choose this. And there's also the opportunity to participate in parks and recreations, our community schools, and other youth-based in-person activities on remote days, because we want to make sure that our kids are staying connected to their schools and for the safe social interaction. Grades will be given in the LMS and attendance will be taken. But again, I want to stress that, you know, our main model is that phased hybrid with all remote to start. And again, these are the current learning management systems as possible full remote delivery platforms. Again, you have your Edgenuity, Florida Virtual School, and TECA Connections Academy, which is Commonwealth Virtual School as well. And again, we are evaluating these this week, and there's more information to come. So stay tuned, please.
All right, I'll have one. I will have one.
So in terms of planning for a high quality phased hybrid experience, which has been our intention and plan, wanted to sort of take you through our initial thinking of phasing. First, this has been an active time within the district for getting schools ready to reopen. This began even well before we ended the school year. And it ranged, these are a lot of the activities that schools are not typically involved in from the end of the school year. But learning a great deal and working in collaboration with health to make sure that upon return, staff would have and students the correct PPE to be safe, signage throughout the buildings so that we can control the flow of students and really minimize students congregating. Furniture and looking at the replacement of furniture so that we can meet more readily the 6-foot distance, social distance, dividers in terms of plexiglass, where to put them and getting them installed, storage containers in order to be able to take furniture that can't be used out and really leave as much of the footprint in the room as possible to spread the desks out for students when they're able to come in person. Tents, because we are committed to making sure that we have some outdoor options, particularly as the weather is good and healthy. Our technology needs, and in our district, as an urban district, this has been a big lift, and that is really assessing through the principals and the teachers' help our families' needs relative to a computer, relative to a hotspot, most recently headphones, as a request of something that would help our students to stay more focused and to be able to connect. And so as Dr. Curley will update later on in the PowerPoint, we've made incredible headway with this so that we're pretty confident we're down to about 100 students that we're working toward that still have connection issue, and we'll resolve that over August. But again, this is literally family by family. The health and safety protocol development that the mayor and Dr. Crest, Mr. Crest spoke about earlier. Testing metrics, which again are not, these are not our testing assessment metrics, these are health testing metrics. The building filtration and ventilation assessment, which again, if it were not for the city, we would not have that expertise to do. Classroom layouts and how things can work at the 6-foot distance. Of course, professional development, curriculum planning, and collaboration. These are all been going on now for some time. So when we talk about the phasing and we talk about the phase of the hybrid, the first phase, which we're calling sort of 1A, is the teacher and building prep. This is the phase that in order to ever get to the point of having students be able to safely come back, these are things that we need to be able to do. So this ranges everything from the preparation of the teachers, the training on the health, sanitary, and safety protocols that are being developed, having the room to refix and appropriately outfit the classrooms, building specific plans that you heard Mr. Race talk about, each building being different, each building requiring a different filtration and ventilation mitigation inspection, the continuation of the technology for our families, communication on the testing capacity procedures and thresholds as those become available, a 12-day orientation, so this is 10 days that the state has granted us out of the 180-day calendar, plus 2 that we had already planned with our teachers, so it'll be a 12-day staff orientation during those dates. And then, during that time, as well as other time, being able to continue to find time for educators to connect with their families, hopefully safely outdoors, review of the expectations for all remote learning so that it meets more readily the expectations you as parents have, training for family and students on the platforms and the resources, our SEL supports for our students, and all of the take-home materials so that students don't have to share them for them to be able to take home and use in the all remote phase. So quite a bit to be done before we even start talking about the next pieces of the phasing. Next, please. So then we come to the all remote phase, and this is for grades pre-K to 12 in an all remote learning mode. This is what we are actively working with our unions on right now to ensure that they can be successful, and it reflects in the learning model what our parents have asked for. This is again a strong focus on the synchronous and less, as it was last year, on the asynchronous, and the option to be able to flavor this with the ability to join other kind of social emotional activities such as recs, community schools, and so forth. We provided down at the bottom, again, a lot of this is new terminology. The key difference between synchronous and asynchronous is synchronous is live, and that can be in a variety of ways that you're interacting with an educator, either in person or remotely, versus asynchronous, which is generally things are assigned, or you might be working in a group, but you're continuing the learning process and the activity, but you're doing it independently. Next. So in order to move from the all remote into any kind of phasing that is going to involve the return of students, there's really 4 things that need to happen. The building filtration and ventilation needs to be resolved. The testing component needs to be in place. There needs to be the agreed upon metrics so that we know when it's safe or not. And we have to have agreement and collaboration relative with our unions to what the change of working conditions look like. And so those are the things that we're working through in that phase 1 with the hopes of being able to get to phase 2, which is really about starting to prioritize and phase in students. In terms of the priority groupings, this comes straight from the Department of Education. The 2 groups that they're really stressing to try to prioritize are special education students with significant complex needs, which is a lot of our sub-separate programming, and our English language WIDA 1 and 2, who are our newcomers. And these students need as much in-person time as possible, again, because they are the least able to access remotely the services they need. So in this phase, in 2A and B, this would be to bring them in Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, with the idea that Wednesday needs to remain an all-remote day so we can do a deep cleaning of the actual rooms in the buildings. We also listed here the possible inclusion of UNIDO WIDA 1 Level 1. We're in conversations right now, Sarah Davila, as well as UNIDA staff to talk about which students would need to be included. We've listed the WIDA Level 1, but in truth, in a bilingual program, everyone's learning a new language. It might just be a different language for the first time. So we're still looking at this and figuring out whether we would factor them straight into phase B, which would be when the English language learners WIDAs 1 and 2 come back. Next, please. And then phase 3, again, along the lines of prioritizing, again, looking at DESE guidelines, grades pre-K to 2, transitioning back in. This is again going to be important since they will be 2 days in and 3 days remote to have an A cohort and a B cohort. We again will look to honor siblings and to make it as easy as possible for parents. We're also looking in this way of being able to offer more on the asynchronous or the non-in-person days where there would be other kinds of activities. If we were in the all remote, you would see things like our specialists, our interventionists, our reading specialists. This could also be where other kind of group activities that we participate in get done, or individual mental health counseling. The idea being to try to keep the kids as structured and with the delivery of live instruction or in person as possible on those other days. Ideally, we would start with our pre-K and K, and then we would follow those with a 3B phase of grades 1 and 2. I know we heard testimony from one of the speakers who spoke about that it's not just 2nd grade, it's also 3rd grade. I think what we know is that, you know, kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd are really our reading grades. They're developing their reading skills, and to have had an abrupt end to the 3rd grade certainly has left those students needing some additional closure and support. So we would kind of continue up thinking about in 3A and 3B how we can get to the next group of students. So Chad, I think it's the next slide. And so this would be for 4A grades 3 and 4, and then 4B grades 5 and 6, and then finally our middle grades 7 and 8. Again, all of this is dependent on any given point at us being able to resolve the issues we've laid out and what's going on with the virus at any given point. The way the hybrid is structured from the state is that you need to be able to go from in-person to all remote to in-person. So the idea is that the model has to be built with fluidity. Student gets COVID, you have to go out for quarantine. You have to quarantine the class. Same thing with the school. If you have multiples, we may have to quarantine the school or put the school out. So the ability for teachers to be able to work seamlessly with families, to be able to go back and forth between that in-person and that all remote is going to be critical. But the threshold for that is making sure that we've done everything we need to do in phase one, which is it's a tall task, but things we're actively working on, and of course the status of the virus at any given point. Next, please. In terms of Somerville High, Next Wave Full Circle, and Scale, we're going to be providing some updates, we hope this week on Somerville High. We're hoping to be able to get some additional building information concretely this week, and that will help us in part to be able to figure out next steps. And then for the following week, we're hoping for Next Wave Full Circle and Scale that we can get some additional information. In each of these, it has to do with the building that they're in and what we are not able to do. So we will ask folks' patience while we get that information, and then as soon as we do, we'll adjust that for what kind of phase they need and what the plan is that they need. Next, please. So just in summary and quickly, really we're in the district prep component right now. We're moving into the teacher and building preparation and moving toward where all students return in all remote learning mode. That would be the end of phase one. The jump from phase 1 to 2, and that's why you'll notice 2, 3, and 4 in a box, and the box clearly at the top says that where populations of students are engaging in in-person learning, if at any point the risk is considered too high, students will transition back to the all remote learning model. So for parents to understand that that may be for a short duration or it may be for a longer duration, depending on what's going on with the virus. And to get from that stage 1 into that phase 1 into phase 2, we also have to ensure we have our COVID testing and rapid result. We have our buildings, filtration and airflow identified and mitigated, excuse me, and that we've been able to sort of work through the working conditions with our various unions. So that's sort of to just give you a sense of how we will eventually be able to scale through, if possible, if conditions allow it, to be able to take our students back and in what order we would attempt to prioritize who needs what. And again, we'll have more information on the high schools and on Scale, hopefully this week and a bit next week. I think, you know, with any of this, people would love timeline. They would love dates. And I would too. That's how I function. However, because some of the things that you heard the mayor speak about, and you heard Rich Race and Doug Kress speak about, these are not simple things. And they're not simple things in education. They're actually very complex. And we need to do them right because they determine the safety of our students and staff and families. And so that is our commitment to do. So once those become clearer in terms of the timeline, that's when we'll be able to really put more of a time frame to what the phasing could look like. And that's, of course, as we collaborate with our partners in our various unions. Next, please. And so I'm going to hand it off for Mr. Mazza to talk a little bit about, having heard all of your feedback, what we are considering are keys to the high quality phased hybrid experience this year. Mr. Mazza?
Yes, thank you, Superintendent Skipper. So when we think about it as we begin the year in the remote part of our phased hybrid model, you know, we are guided by our commitment to creating high quality and comprehensive learning experiences that supports the development of all of our students. So when we talk about planning, we know that face-to-face contact, students, teachers is crucial. And we're talking about significant through synchronous instruction with the priority on live instruction, because we know and we have systems that we use over the summer that really work and it has a positive impact on students. increasing our small group and individual one-to-one learning experiences. We know we've had a lot of success over the summer with our small groups and one-to-one learning. We want to emulate that across the district. We know that access to technology and reliable internet service, we need that to support the learning for both staff and students. Without it, we continue to increase gaps. We also know that consistent weekly schedules of student classes and activities with clear work expectations for the week are crucial to making this a success. We also know that clear expectations about attendance, participation, work completion, and grading, all of those will be much different than they were in the spring. Everything on this page will be much different. And we also know that increased educator feedback gives students and guides them with their learning and development. Now, all things that are listed here, a lot of it, we have to negotiate, but we feel in our planning, these are crucial steps to really make our model successful for all students. We also know that weekly communications with families and support for staff communication with families in multiple languages and in multiple ways, extremely important. We need to improve on how we did things in the spring. We want more communication, more frequent communication. And then when we look at the next piece, the proposed daily synchronous instruction times by grade bands, and again, they're pending negotiations, but when you look at pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, 2 hours of synchronous instruction. Grades 1 through 3, 3 hours of synchronous instruction. Grades 4 and 5, 4 hours of synchronous instruction, and grades 6 through 12, 5 hours of synchronous instruction. But what I want to point out is it doesn't mean that the same teacher is teaching all of those hours synchronously. It could be a reading specialist. It could be a special educator. It could be a specialist, art, gym, music, library. And it also could be a combination. So when we think about the number of hours, it's not specifically one person doing all of those, sitting in front of the screen teaching for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours straight. It's a combination of educators, and it also could be counseling. We also know that meaningful independent work that's tied to previous instruction and is accessible with minimal at-home adult supervision on all remote days is extremely important. We heard a lot from families that it was very difficult for families. They struggled to support their students because they felt like they had to be their teachers. So when we think about the independent work, we want to change that up so we can build student agency and students can become more independent with their work. We also know that a variety of social emotional supports to address mental health needs is crucial, especially since the way we stopped in March. We know all students, all staff, all families have gone through some kind of trauma with this, and we want to make sure we are supporting them the best way that we can. We also know that we need to provide materials for students that they can have at home and in school when we return in person, such as academic and art supplies, science materials, reading books, and math and ELA workbooks. So that way we can emulate what happens in school when students are at home, which makes the transition more fluid when we go from hybrid in-person to remote and remote to hybrid in-person. And we also know that in-person community building and play-based activities, which will be provided by Parks and Recreation, our community schools, and other youth providers, are crucial on remote days. We need to make sure that our students are active. We need to make sure that they're engaging, they're interacting. And these are all ways that we feel that we can improve on our learning model.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mazza. And so I'm going to have Dr. Jessica Boston Davis address our equity slides. I think, as you know, as a school committee and as a district, this has been our priority. And so everything that we're trying to do through the replanning process is keeping equity at the center. So Dr. Boston Davis.
Great, thank you. I'll start by saying, as we know, that last November, the school committee passed the equity policy, which will continue to be our guiding lens, and it was the lens we used when we created this plan. So now I'm going to talk a little bit through the slides around how we're maintaining the focus of equity and a few things that we are doing in my department specifically, but then also you'll hear throughout the rest of the presentation. To start, this summer, we launched the Advancing Equity Task Force. Sorry, I was clicking the wrong thing. We launched the Advancing Equity Task Force, which is a group of 19 staff members in various roles across the district, and we're thinking about equity and inequity in Somerville Public Schools and proposing shifts and changes in both policy and practice. We also will launch the new school-based equity specialists this upcoming school year. And each school will have this equity specialist that will work closely with the principals, instructional leadership teams, school site councils, myself, to think about how we're going to advance equity and in learning anti-racist policies and behaviors in the school, each school community. Next slide, please. A few other things that we're working on for the upcoming school year: anti-bias, anti-racist training and PD. So we know that this is core. This is something that we've been thinking about for several years and definitely heightened in the past over the summer after the murder of George Floyd and many others. So we will continue to be thinking about sessions in professional development for staff, thinking about identity, implicit bias, deficit-based thinking, culturally relevant pedagogy, critical consciousness, abolitionist teaching. That's just an example of some of the things that I'm currently planning for the school year. We hope that the sessions will include not only staff, but also students, families, and district leaders, and to focus the core of this work. In addition, as we started last year, we're going to continue our school equity action plans. And each school and department will continue to develop these plans that were started last year, but they will be modified as we begin this school year to address remote and in-person learning. So to address the hybrid model that Superintendent Skipper discussed earlier. And we are very excited about our continued partnerships with organizations such as the New York City Leadership Academy, the Harvard Graduate School of Education, TNTP, Teen Empowerment, Peace and History, Teaching Tolerance. These are all organizations that we're hoping to continue our partnerships with. We also have a few new partners joining us this year. We're hoping to work with Dr. Darren Graves, who's faculty at Simmons and the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Dr. Sarah Freeman, also faculty at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, SEED, YW, and a new partnership with Unbound Ed, which focuses on advancing equity in schools in the district.
Thank you, Dr. Boston Davis. So as you can see, equity is going to be in the heart of what we're doing, regardless of the model. So in the hybrid, in the phased hybrid, starting out all remote, we will be actively utilizing these partnerships, providing PD teachers of how to be able to incorporate in their lessons, synchronous and asynchronous. And then at some point, when it's safe and we're able to come back in person, these will continue on. And I also love that Dr. Boston Davis talked about extending that circle beyond just teachers, but to also include students and families as well. So thank you, Dr. Boston Davis. So framing it now through the lens of equity, now we're going to sort of go into some of the schools, particularly the high schools, as they're very different, and also the departments, and to hear about the work that's being planned for this upcoming year. So I think we're going to begin with Somerville High School in the next slide. And I think tonight we have Principal Lagambina, we have Jody Remington, who's the department head for ELA, and Alicia Kirsten, who is department head for history, who are going to walk us through a bit their thinking. Again, these are proposed plans, and these are what we're actively working on with our unions. So who will lead for the Somerville High team?
I'll start off, Superintendent Skipper. This is Principal Lagambina. So first, I do want to thank Mary and the central admin staff, for their support, leadership, and guidance. These are certainly challenging times, definitely. So I just want to acknowledge the support that we've been receiving and her guidance and leadership. At the high schools, basically since, June, we left school, we have had teams of staff that includes administrators, teachers, support staff, working on various things like logistics and student engagement and teaching and learning, and scheduling. And two of those leaders at the high school have really been Jody Remington and Alicia Kirsten, and they've been leading the charge in terms of scheduling and teaching and learning. And Jody's going to take us through these next two slides, but I just wanted to thank the two of them for all their hard work. They've been working tirelessly. Their work actually started, before we ended school in June. So thank you, Jody and Alicia, and I'll turn it over to Jody.
Thank you, Sibby. Before we begin, just to elaborate a little bit more on the planning process at the high school, last May we were very quick to ask teachers and staff to help us. And almost immediately we had about 70 staff reach out and join us in this planning process. So I would just like to say thank you to all the staff who has helped us throughout May and June. And as we continue this work in July, most of the staff has remained on the committees and will continue to do so as we prepare for the start of school in the fall. So just to sort of focus us on what a phased hybrid at the high school will look like is really we wrapped our head around some guiding principles, thinking about health and safety, and really keeping equity and social emotional learning at the forefront when we make decisions. This effort to build community and make connections with all of our staff and our students, increase student engagement, and obviously meet the need of all of our students. When we started to think about what a remote or phased-in hybrid plan would look like at the high school, we really took a close look at some of our areas that we know we needed to improve on from the closure. We really focused on what will relationships look like as we move to a remote model or a phased-in model. How can we increase student support at the high school, and what will high quality remote learning look like? We're going to see a sample schedule in a minute, and when you see a longer block of time, it's often overwhelming for staff and students. And I think it's really important to note that longer blocks don't mean me as a teacher talking for a longer amount of time, but it means how can we use blocks of time to have small groups, have conferences, how to have direct instruction. So really, what does a combination of lesson planning look like? Also, we wanted to think about how can we increase time to support teachers, to support planning, to really implement high quality assessments that aren't traditional. And really, how can we give teachers time to provide effective feedback to students so families can know how students will improve throughout the year? Taking all of this and the complex needs of the high school into consideration, we started to work on a sample schedule. As Mary has said, this all needs to be negotiated, but I think the work in July with around 25 people at consistent meetings on our scheduling team really helped us guide sort of this sample that you're going to see now. At the high school, students take 7 classes. And so we knew right away that from the spring, from closure, that students couldn't. It was really challenging for students to focus on 7 classes over the course of the week. So we started to think about how can we break this down and make the week manageable for students and staff. So we took the 7 and we broke it down into week A and week B. This does not mean that students will be in school one week and not the other. We also took into consideration the cohorts of A and B. You'll see it in our schedule as red and blue representing the Highlander colors. In this sample week, to start our mornings, teachers have time for prep and students have time to meet with counselors, to attend CCR meetings, to work independently, and then students will join their classes, 3 classes every week, to provide a reduced class load and just more time to focus on community, relationship building, and obviously academics. We reserved Wednesday for our asynchronous, our independent workday. This doesn't mean that students won't be interacting with adults or their teachers. It just will look differently. Students, the hope is that every student at the high school has a teacher mentor, and also on this day that service providers can work with students on a one-on-one setting. Week B is a repeat of week A, if students will participate in the other classes. It looks very simple, but this is like layer one of a complex model at the high school when we take into consideration our 1,200 students, our CTE programs, our Ls, our special ed students, just all of our diverse learners and our staff. So this is just the first layer of a planning process that will continue for days and weeks to come.
Who is speaking now?
I'm here.
Okay.
Yep. I'm going to turn it to you. But I just wanted to say thank you to the Somerville High team. There's probably nothing more complex than a comprehensive high school schedule. And so when you add in CTE and you add in all of our programming, you've done a great job at really beginning to look at how best to organize the instructional blocks that are student-centered. So hopefully we'll keep collaborating and we're able to come to some consensus on it, but that's a great start. Thank you. So now, Margaret, I'm going to turn it over to you for Next Wave Full Circle, because I know you too and your team have been working on quite a bit.
We have, and I do just want to echo what Sibby was saying. You know, to be part of such a collaborative and supportive team has really helped me in this process as a school leader, and certainly as a school that straddles both worlds of middle school and high school. I learn a lot, and I appreciate all the feedback I get from all my colleagues. So just want to put that out there. And you know, Next Wave Full Circle just received a bar grant for $550,000 for the next 2 years, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so this is work that we want to keep moving forward, understanding the world we live in right now. And so our guiding principles are really around narrowing that focus of what is going to help us move this work forward. We were piloting a ton of work last year. We want to keep moving the work forward, but really kind of narrowing in on what is that, and being concise with that, having clear expectations, clear rubrics, communication, and kind of what Jody was saying. It was a lot in the spring, just managing a lot of classes, students, you know, checking in and out, and so we're really kind of like just pulling things together and like what's the heart of what we want to accomplish right now in remote, as we hopefully move into a hybrid soon. Understanding what our barriers are and lowering them, both for students and for staff. There's a lot of barriers to remote learning that we want to really kind of lower for everybody. Addressing equity, understanding what are our equity issues specifically at Next Wave Full Circle, making sure there's access to the right technology, materials, but also making sure that our students are hearing from a diverse population, and that our courses reflect those different voices in what they're learning. So that's also a priority of ours. And being individualized and recognizing that at Next Wave Full Circle, we have students with such diverse needs and individual needs that we have to be focused on regardless of whatever our plans are moving forward. So we are going to continue to focus on our community. I mean, that's one of the cornerstones of Next Wave Full Circle and our relationships in our teacher counselor model. And so that's certainly a priority. We're going to be focusing only on 3 competencies this year instead of 5. We're going to continue to support teachers with the planning and implementation of project-based learning, providing effective feedback, and having different cycles of meeting with students about that, and making progress towards their individual goals, and always making space for celebrations and focusing on our core values. And so though there aren't a ton of specific plans, those are what we're going to be focusing on. We did have some teachers meet this summer around, you know, what would it look like if we're hybrid? How would students be in a class? We have students that need a lot of movement breaks, that do, you know, being in a classroom all day long is going to be challenging. And so we were starting to think creatively about our outside, about our nearby Foss Park. How can we incorporate those into the day? Also thinking about mask breaks that students need to have. And something we want to start thinking about this year, both in hybrid and remote, is putting in a WIN block. And WIN stands for what I need. And it can be asynchronous, but it could also be synchronous time where students are really getting some individualized support around maybe it's a specific project they're working on, or maybe it's a language, or it's a math, or it's counseling. Really, it's going to be individualized on the student. And we are moving, last year we piloted team taught classes, I should say co-taught classes, and interdisciplinary classes. And that's something we're still going to move forward with. And, teachers have the option of working with colleagues in planning an interdisciplinary course. And so a class might say class A, class B, but that could be one class, two teachers working together on one project. And then you could flip to the next slide. And I do want to acknowledge there are, times listed here. That's just for thinking through, nothing's been solidified or, as far as schedules just yet, but what could a remote schedule look like? And again, building in where it says class A or class B, that could be the synchronous, like whole class, but then also making sure that we plan time for small group instruction, and then making sure we have time for our counseling groups in there. And again, keeping Wednesdays as our half days, but it would be asynchronous time, or it could be synchronous time half the time, and then half the time would be teacher planning and PLCs. So this is where our thinking is. I have two different, teams. We had one team looking at it earlier in July, and then our reopening team looking at stuff now. But that's where we are next week in full circle.
That's great, Margaret. So it's wonderful to be able to see between the high school and full circle next wave how you're taking the work you've been doing with BAR and you're laying it in despite a pandemic to make sure that the schedules can reflect that kind of deeper thinking work that's needed. So excellent job. We'll look forward to the updates on the schedules.
Absolutely.
Turning to our preschool students. So Dr. Q.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Superintendent Skipper. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is based on what we've learned over the last few months and some intensive work that was done this summer with actually a pre-K through second grade planning team. So what I'm going to talk about can apply not just to preschool, but also to kindergarten, and I think will inform some of the things that, as others have mentioned tonight, that happen in the lower elementary grades. What we do know about young children is that they respond well to authentic and integrated hands-on learning experiences where math, literacy, science, art, social studies, social emotional development, work habits are all addressed congruently through interesting learning experiences. We also know that realistic, flexible schedules are going to be really important for families. We really understood and heard loud and clear and experienced. Many of our teachers have young children themselves, and so we're able to experience things on both sides of the fence. Of some kids can have a longer stamina for online synchronous learning experiences, and others need it parsed out in small doses in order to be successful. And so we're looking carefully at those schedules. But one thing we do know is that the children are going to need consistent experiences across classrooms and across grade levels in order to be ready for the next learning experience that comes to them when they move up through the school system. And that has to happen with teachers collaborating with each other, which was already happening in the spring, where teachers were, you heard this before from the high school, where teachers were teaming and realized with shared expertise they actually could deliver more effective instruction, and supported by instructional coaches who are working on the front lines and behind the scenes to help teachers be successful. The daily synchronous and asynchronous offerings will happen from classroom teachers. We know that children benefited even from a small amount of face-to-face contact with a teacher or someone on their teaching team each day to be connected to the learning experience. So that will be part of our plan for sure, again, negotiated with our teachers union. And a main focus for us is a guided focus. So this will be part of the curriculum on outdoor education, being outside, and that children's play is learning, and that they really love being engaged in interesting projects, again, that help connect all of the curriculum areas. So that family-school connection is something that will be an integral part of any kind of work that we do in early education, and that we recognize the importance of building community virtually, in-person, orientation videos, creating that school culture. We're really committed to bringing kids back to have a face-to-face interaction with a teacher, to bond with them. We know that will be key to the success of any kind of remote learning experience. Families also shared with us how important it was to have that outreach. And so we're committed also to weekly family calls or Zoom calls in the way that a family communicates best. So we'll be connecting with families in that way, and you'll hear more later from the Somerville Family Learning Collaborative about the support there. We'll be really working with them closely. We also, teachers gave feedback on the importance of within group small learning cohorts to create those peer connections, and whenever possible to be able to have those peer connections happen remotely in small groups, and then perhaps those children can be supported to, if they choose to attend some of our rec and community schools programs so that they can get to have that important social interaction. And again, in connection with Somerville Family Learning Collaborative, how can we model in people's home languages instruction to support learning? You heard at the top of this presentation that families didn't expect to become their children's teacher, but in essence, they are the first teacher of their child. But we will need to support families carefully with instructions on how to use any materials that we send home. Our synchronous learning experiences really serve three purposes. It's a community connection for children and community building. It's an instructional experience, and it's a launch to meaningful independent work that children will do during this time of remote learning. And then finally, we know that families need instruction in technology and platforms, and that they have asked for platforms to be consistent. And so we're working diligently to make some alignment there and ensure that even our youngest learners have access to the tech they need in order to engage with remote learning. Thank you so much.
Excellent. And I also just want to give a shout out with Lisa, that not only is Lisa our expert relative to early ed, but Somerville Public Schools and Lisa and her department have become the expert for our mixed deliveries. So there's a great deal of support that's going on for all families in Somerville who might be in the mixed deliveries, and it's coming from our district. So we're very proud of that, and thank you for your work, Lisa.
Thank you so much.
So now we're going to move on to special ed, and this is an important component of the presentation. Department of Education has laid out pretty specifically the guidance of what we need to do. And so, Christine Trevisoni, our wonderful special education department head, has digested it and put it in a way that hopefully we will all be able to follow along. But this is going to be part of the plan that's going to need to be much different than it was back in the spring, so that our special education students can make the growth and the benchmarks that they need to make. So, Christine?
Thank you, Superintendent Skipper. Thank you, everyone, for having me. First, I want to acknowledge my colleagues so far tonight and their great work, and it's so great to work with them as we play a role in each part of this. And most importantly, to recognize the special educators. Our requests from the Department of Education and ongoing expectations change weekly, sometimes change hourly, and the special education staff has always been willing to step up. We take a deep breath, we say we're going to get through it, and we figure out what to do and how to do it next. So I know that we will continue with this process as we move forward. So when we're looking at special education, the emphasis really is around instruction and services model of delivery. So the expectations are really going to be about having a consistent schedule, structured learning time, and frequent communication with parents. So when we're talking about instruction and services, it's really about how do we provide services in a way that maintains faith, free and appropriate public education, and services will be delivered through structured lessons, some teletherapy, and video-based lessons. We'll establish a regular and consistent schedule of classes, interventions, services, and therapies as required by the student's IEPs. There'll be both synchronous and asynchronous lessons, as you've heard about before. One thing that special education is asked to do, last year we were asked to do what was called a remote learning plan, but that was brought up to us later in the process. So now we're fully aware that we're being asked to develop what DESE is calling a COVID-19 learning model family communication plan. And really what this means is we're going to start off the year before we begin meeting with students, meeting with families, meeting and saying, let's talk about what's happening, getting input. In the past, we said, this is the way we're going to provide services. What's happening? How can we best support your son or daughter? How can we best provide the services in the phase-in hybrid model? What are the accommodations, the modifications, and how will the services provided on an IEP? It's important that we think about it both from remote and when we move into a hybrid model, because we have to be aware of groupings, we have to be aware of our inability to move kids in and out of classrooms and try and maintain the social distancing. We also want to work with parents to identify expected ways of communication and how we can best communicate with parents and engage with them. It's important to know that although we may be developing, we will be developing this remote plan or COVID-19 learning model family communication plan, that the services on the IEP remain the services on the IEP, although they may be adjusted in the way they're provided. Maybe it's not within a regular ed setting, more it's pull out, synchronous, asynchronous, that your stay put rights remain in place with the IEP. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Some other questions that come up often that I wanted to address are some other things that have happened for special education. During the remote learning in the spring, there was always questions around testing and evaluations and the validity of doing tests online. As you've seen here tonight, sometimes the internet works, sometimes it doesn't. Some speakers work, some videos work. Any of those will impact the validity of an exam or a test. And so that's really something that we've learned to figure out how can we do that best. What we were able to do were to do all of our annual reviews, and the team did a great job of running annual review meetings for students on IEPs. We will be starting special education testing related to eligibility and reevaluations during the phased-in hybrid model. We're hoping to start to do some of that starting next week outdoors. So those sessions will take place outdoors, and we will be contacting parents to set those up. We will continue those as long as we can, as long as the weather permits, as long as they're outdoors. And then we'll be moving to what DESE has recommended is called the READ method, which is a review of existing evaluation data. You're not always required to do formalized assessment, although that's a great way of doing it. There's a lot of data that's collected, and so we'll use that data as well as information from families and from teachers to help us to make decisions. When we're talking about transition for early interventions, these are for students who are turning the age of 3. Typically, we have to complete their evaluations before the age of 3. Again, we were not able to do that during our time of closure. EI is early intervention. They're extended their services until October 15th. That gives us time to complete the evaluations we need to complete. What is important to know is that in the spring, and we will continue to do this in the fall, when we knew a student based upon their disability, what they would qualify because of their disability and the information we had, we did find them eligible. We did not wait to complete evaluations. In other situations, we included students in services that they were getting at their early intervention. So we might have included them in a speech and language group. We may have included them in an occupational therapy group, or included them in a ECIP class, even though they may not have had an IEP yet, because we wanted them to continue to have a rich experience. Talked already about team meetings. An issue I know that Mary has discussed already is transportation. When we're talking about transportation and we're talking about social distancing, we really, the guidance is now 3 feet. So it's 3 feet distance on a van, in which it should be 1 student per row. Or if there's students from a family, siblings from a family, they can all be in the same row. The impact of this is that before we might have been able to take 6, 7, 8 students on a van, we may be able to take 3 or 4 on a van. So it significantly impacts us. and could impact us in having to triple or quadruple the amount of vans that we're required to use. We have already in my office reached out to everyone who receives specialized transportation to talk about, if parents are interested in taking the van, because we also have to worry about the windows all need to be open. We need to make sure there's proper ventilation and that students wear masks. And we're very much encouraging families, if they can, if possible, to transport or to walk with their child to school, and that we would provide parent reimbursement. One more slide, I think. And finally, we have some big items that we get asked about all the time. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Things that we will be considering and continue to consider while we're preparing for the fall is that we will be doing ongoing progress monitoring and data collection. Progress reports will go out the same as report cards as they did in the spring. We also, at this point, MCAS is still considered on. I know that is a discussion with the state as to whether MCAS is going to be happening or not, but I have talked to the special education teachers, and we are already beginning to plan and collect portfolio materials for MCAS ultimate preparations. We've worked very closely. I think I've become a PPE expert. I'm also now in charge of personal protective equipment. In that the demand and the needs for personal protective equipment for students with special education are significant and diverse. So we've done a lot of ordering from clear masks so that speech and language pathologists, when they're talking to students and trying to talk about the formation of their mouth, or trying to teach reading, or for students with autism or students who may have a hard time understanding facial expressions or picking up on social cues, that they're able to see those items. We've also bought face shields as we worry about toileting or any other items that may take place. Out of district students are students that we continue to look out for, and we will be following the same mandates for them. If the school in which they're attending is, whether they're attending full-time in person, remote, or a hybrid, we will be following that plan. We'll be transporting as needed, again, asking parents to consider parent reimbursement wherever possible, and that those students will also have remote learning plans created for them and provided to parents at the beginning of the year. And finally, we always think about the considerations for our students who are high risk with medical conditions. As you know, we have the Skip and Ship program, which has students with some significant medically fragile students. There are students that oftentimes need the services the most, but we also know that they face many medical issues coming to school. So we want to work closely with families, to work with their physicians, to work with our health department, and to really consider what's best for students. And if families choose to continue to have students remain home, that we would work with them around the remote learning plan. So, thank you.
Thank you, Christine. So lots of information there on special education. And I think Christine's done a great job distilling it, but the full report is actually in our full report. So you'll have an opportunity to read as much as you want relative to special ed regulations. So the next is another group, which is a priority for us, which is our English language learners. So Dr. Davila.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm going to present two slides related to language learners. The first slide will be focused mainly on the planning components for reopening. And the second slide will be focused on some lessons learned through our research and our experiences. So just a reminder that the education of every language learner includes English as a second language or language development, as well as meaningful access to content learning with sheltered practices. Our language learners certainly fall within priority students, especially when we think about newcomer students, newly arrived students, students that are at language proficiency levels 1 and 2, students with limited or interrupted formal education certainly are our priority as well. And as Superintendent Skipper noted, that we are still thinking very carefully about our beginning level students in the UNIDOS program. In balance with, in that program, every child is a language learner. So we are trying to fit our thinking and best planning with safety in mind for that group. We know we have a responsibility to deliver ESL instruction in daily blocks. This will be synchronous or in-person instruction, and for students who are beginners at levels 1 and 2, the requirement is a daily double block of ESL. And for the higher levels, it's simply a block. Again, that doesn't mean that students would be in a remote learning a model, or even in person, would be sitting at their desks or sitting in front of a computer for an extended length of time. But it is something that we need to have in consideration. We also have ESL instructional support specialists, ESL teachers, and that small group and one-on-one teaching will continue in remote and in person with our students prioritized. And as Christine was telling us about transportation for special education students, we also have transportation in mind for our language learners. We've been in contact with families, encouraging walking and other safe ways to school as much as possible. And we've been working with our transportation company to plan out double or triple loops through the city to minimize the number of students on the bus. And we will have assigned seats on the bus. Students will be assigned to seats. So next slide, please. These are some of the things that we have learned in our collective research and discussion and planning groups, and in our experience in the spring and in the summer in our summer program for English language learners. A real lesson learned is around teacher collaboration for curriculum development, instructional planning, co-delivery of lessons. ESL is an avenue towards the full curriculum, and we need to work together to deliver it for our students. We also know that lessons need to be interactive and engage students across the domain. So that includes listening, speaking, reading, and writing. We know we need to have ongoing assessment and frequent feedback to our students. Progress monitoring systems have to be in place in whatever model we use. We need to report to parents frequently about how students are doing, and we need to develop success plans when our students are not making the benchmarks that we would like them to make. We need to be using our sheltered and scaffolding techniques to make the content accessible and meaningful for our students who are learning the language, no matter what model we're working in. Our materials have to be culturally relevant, high interest. Our students need to be represented in the materials consistently. And we have to have multiple opportunities for family engagement in learning. And if you could go right to the next slide, please. Because I also have the pleasure of talking a little bit about how we are meeting the needs of families in our work with the Somerville Family Learning Collaborative. If you can go right to the next slide. So attached to the materials tonight is a report from the SFLC, from the Somerville Family Learning Collaborative, about our work in response to COVID-19, March through June. I hope you have a chance to take a look at it. It's very impressive. You'll see
Sarah,
that the entire, yes.
Just to say to all of our viewers, it's in the handouts and it is very impressive, and I would encourage everyone to look at the fine work that our SFLC has been doing. Sorry for the interruption.
No, perfect. Thank you so much. Right away in March, the entire SFLC staff repurposed. We realized that we were in a crisis and we needed to respond quickly. And in that process, we made thousands, we estimate 8,000 to 10,000 points of contact to assess and respond to family needs. And that was through phone, through WhatsApp, through many communication tools. Thanks to the school committee, we now have full-time school-based liaisons in every school. Where the particular liaison was not able to work full-time, we do have full-time coverage through partnership among our liaisons in every school. And our liaisons are part of the school teams that are doing family outreach, resource and referral, providing basic needs and emergency benefits counseling. The SFLC has been a partner to the Immigrant Services Unit that was created as part of the city response to COVID. We have built an amazing cross-sector team of multilingual staff who also are providing intensive support to families and the community at large. And none of this could happen without the strong relationships and the trusted partnerships that we already have in the city and in the community. And we will continue this work. It is I think, a feature of our reopening plan. And our experience, I think, over the last couple of months, how family voice, I believe, has really increased. And our partnership with families, I feel, is tangible and part of the plan that we are presenting to you because we've had the opportunity and the avenues to listen to multilingual families.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. And now Liz Doncaster to talk a little bit about how we intend to meet the social emotional mental health needs, which is definitely one of the #1 topics of staff and of parents. And so have several slides to explain this. So Liz?
Thank you, Mary. Superintendent Skipper, you can go to the next slide. Yes, I'm Liz Doncaster, Director of Student Services. And one of our major focuses since we closed in March was the social, emotional, and mental health supports for our students. Moving into the summer, we realized that we needed to support our students throughout the summer. We didn't normally do that with our counseling staff, so Mary graciously gave us the money to go ahead and continue our counseling throughout the summers with the counselors, deans of students, redirects. They were in touch with about 150 high-risk, high-needs families, along with our embedded services, Riverside, Home for Little Wanderers, CHA. They actually doubled their service capacity from last summer using the telehealth. So they were able to actually connect with over 200 students and families to support them throughout the closing, the remote closing, throughout the summer. And this is a great way for us to stay connected with students and families as we transition to remote, the hybrid version, because we're going to zero in on who we need to support during the transition. And we're going to gain information from the from the engagement trackers that we created back in March. The engagement tracker was an important data base that we used. Teachers input into in a color-coded model, green, yellow, and red, about how much their students were engaging in the curriculum, and then how much their students, their social emotional needs were there. Green was very engaged, yellow was 50% engaged, red was they're not engaging enough, there's something going on with the family. And those yellow and red coded students would be a part of what the SST team would do in the building. Our SST teams, as you know, are a way for our buildings to come together, our support teams, talk about high-risk, high-needs students, and suggest interventions and follow through with the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions. So these engagement trackers really informed our practice back in March, where we were sending my SOAs out for home visits, well visits, bringing technology, making sure people had everything they needed. It's for food-wise. If a piece of equipment tech broke, we switched it out. So those were very important, those engagement trackers. I was a part of the SEL task force. I chaired the task force. We made sure that we had representation from across the district for counselors, pre-K till 12th grade, and we came up with a plan of recommendations for our principals to do for their reopening plans. One of the things we wanted to do is to make sure that each building has its own social emotional team. We hope it's the counselors and the SACs, and that they come together to support the teachers. We know we have second step and as our social emotional curriculum, but we need to supplement that with the current events of COVID and anti-racism. So we want to make sure that our teachers are supported. So we're hoping that these teams will be able to stick with teachers throughout and process remote, hybrid phrase, back to remote, just to give time and space for our students to process what they've gone through in the past 6 months, and process it not only with each other, but through appropriate lessons for different age groups. And we're hoping with our different pro-social philosophies in our buildings, with the PBIS, morning meeting, circle time, that they all can have time to explicitly process what's going on, but also weave it into the social emotional competencies, weave them into the grade and subject matter, so that they can also continue to heal and process what has gone on. We can go to the next slide. The one thing I really want to make sure that we are paying attention to and we are focusing on, as far as our counselors are, is our 504 accommodation plans. We have 200 plus in the district, and it grows every year. I'm advising our counselors to meet with the teachers, go over the plans individually. Where are the challenges going to be with fully remote learning? And if there are accommodations that are challenges, I'm requesting that they reach out to parents and discuss those challenges, and maybe they can coach the parents into putting an accommodation in place at home. For example, if a child is ADHD, and one of their accommodations is a preferential seating in the front of the room, less distraction, maybe we can have the parent make sure they have a quiet space in the house, no distractions in front of their computer, so that they can focus more. So that's a way to sort of help those accommodations, the parents implement the accommodations that we just physically can't do because they're not going to be in front of us in the classroom. Again, our student support teams are very important. I have advised that they start meeting right away, in those first 10 days, to identify high-risk, high-need students who are going to need help transitioning, help engaging. We already know the students that had some challenges engaging. We tried to help them with all the supports we could, but they will be on our radar. We'll know those names. We'll go after those students for interventions. I also have professional learning opportunities that the district has put out around trauma-based sensitive classroom, but I'm doing a specific one for our counselors, redirects, and deans of students around mental health first aids. So how to really sort of zero in on assessing students during the remote. What does an anxious kid look like? What words do they use? Sarah Konechny, who is our Health and Human Resources Clinical Youth Specialist, is going to run this workshop specifically for the support group, and I think it's the extra training that we need. You can go to the next slide. And I know it's been talked about a lot tonight. We are going to use different areas in the school. We have beautiful fields, schoolyards, parks. We want to get kids, if we can use those places to connect communities as we move into the hybrid model. We are going to be able to use those spaces and afford families and students time to get together, get outside, to do things. Parks and Recs Department is going to, it is free, and that program's free, and it includes just the district meals, because we know we've been running the food sites this summer. That was part of what also that I took care of, that I helped manage. But I do want to say this one last thing before my slides are over. We know that the students and families and staff have been affected, and the student that's coming in before us is a more anxious student, has had the last 6 months of experiences behind them. So we are going to go ahead and look at this with empathy, with patience, be very clear in our behavior expectations, be very explicit, use pictures, use signage based around being safe and what we feel students need to do when we come back to the phase and hybrid model. But as far as the discipline aspect is concerned, which is also part of my job, we've made it very clear to our building admin that we have to take each student for what their story is, and we have to look at them with an equitable, trauma-sensitive lens and do all that we can in a proactive response to their challenging behaviors before we put in any type of a consequence. So we've made that very clear. And I just feel that patience and empathy is what we really need moving forward. And the Student Services Department is here to support, as always. And I thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Excellent. Dr. Curley, help us understand how you are helping us to prepare for the safe return to our buildings.
Thank you, Superintendent Skipper. Thank you, Liz. If anyone else can hear, their small children are not asleep at 9 a.m. I'm with you. I hear you. I sympathize with you. I'll try to go quickly through my slides. We're almost there. So thank you for your engagement and your stamina. We are doing, as has been mentioned, everything in our power to make schools and classrooms as safe as possible for our students and our staff. A lot of this has been covered. I'm not going to retread that ground, but we have spaced things out as best we can. We're working closely with our partners in DPW to enhance the cleaning and sanitization protocols for each school. We know that SARS-CoV-2 is transmitted primarily through respiratory droplets, but that airborne droplets are likely another route. And so, as Rich Race mentioned, we're doing a lot of investing in ways to ensure there's additional airflow and turnover of air and bringing in outside air into the buildings to reduce that possible risk. If we can jump over to the next slide as well. The district has secured a significant amount of personal protective equipment for all staff. These are surgical masks, face masks, nitrile gloves, things that the CDC has recommended help as an additional layer of personal protection for all staff. And as I said, we're trying to get as much out of the classrooms and the buildings as possible, especially anything that we can't readily clean and disinfect. So that work continues to be underway. The next slide highlights some of the work that the mayor mentioned at the top, along with HHS Director Doug Kress. We see testing, surveillance testing, as a key additional layer to keeping staff and students safe. We're working to build our testing capacity beyond what has been available in the community through Cambridge Health Alliance testing. And we see kind of all of these measures, mandatory facial coverings, enhanced hygiene, physical distancing, ventilation improvements, environmental controls, as part of a whole host of layers that help keep our students and our staff safe as they come back. So I appreciate the time, the chance to talk about it. I'll turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Karen Woods. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here tonight. Thank you so much for sticking with us. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the professional development and the way that we've also been supporting staff since the closure in March. We realize that this is certainly impactful for our students, but also our staff. And so we've made sure that we can support staff as best as we can. So starting back in the spring, school closed around March 11th, I believe was the date, and starting the week of March 23rd, that Monday, we had professional development up and running. So we said, let's get a week to figure what this looks like. And then we started offering a whole host of sessions to try to support our educators in how to do this, because this was new. No one expected it. So we started hosting PD around online learning tools like Google Classroom and Google Meet and Zoom and Flipgrid and Screencastify. And luckily, we already have amazing teachers who know how to use these tools, who stepped up and said, I can offer this, I know how to do this, you know, and so as always, I'm impressed and humbled by our staff and what they can offer. So we had a whole host of teachers logging thousands upon thousands of hours as a collective group, not individually, and just taking it all in to say, all right, we're in this, and so lots of engagement by staff. We also realized at that time that it was important to focus on staff wellness as well. So we had a counselor who was just wonderful and said, I'll run a weekly session for teachers to kind of talk about what's going on, to support each other. So we kept that focus on both the online learning tools and staff wellness in the spring. So then comes summer, and you'd think that teachers need a break, and they surely do, but many of them say, I want to keep going. So we have been offering a whole host of summer PD opportunities with the focus areas of equity, remote learning best practices, trauma and social emotional learning, and transition back to school. So in order to be a part of the summer PD catalog, the PD had to fit in one of those 4 buckets. So now moving into how we're planning to support teachers, we have this really great opportunity from the Department of Education, these 10 additional days for planning and professional development. We plan to use those to their full extent and really allow educators time to learn some best practices, to collaborate with one another. So during that time, during those first 10, but really 12, because as Superintendent Skipper said, we have those extra 2 days that were already in our calendar. We plan to focus on equity, as Dr. Boston Davis talked about earlier, our COVID-19 procedures and routines, best practices for remote learning and engagement and building online community, continued use of online platforms, and go even deeper there. As Ms. Doncaster talked about, trauma and social emotional learning has to be at the core, engaging in effective student and family outreach, and talking about assessment and what assessment might look like. So it's a lot of areas to cover, but we have the time, and so we will really utilize that time. And then beyond the first 2 weeks of school, continued into the school year, it'll be really important that we continue to engage and be responsive to educators' needs, because I'm sure they're going to be rapidly evolving and changing throughout the year. So we'll continue to offer professional development, a variety of PD that educators can choose to engage in. We will keep those focus areas, but make sure that we're doing our best to meet the needs of our staff so that they can meet the needs of the students.
Thank you, Karen. Welcome back. We have missed you tremendously during the maternity.
Thank you.
And so now you may be wondering how we're going to pay for all of this. So thus, our illustrious Finance Director, Fran Gorski.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. I just want to give kudos to the cabinet team, principals and educators at the meeting this evening. A very insightful presentation. So this slide could really be entitled "The Current Funding to Support the Plan," because we're likely to need additional funding. These 3 grants will look familiar to school committee. These are grants that the school committee accepted at the meeting on July 27th. There's a reopening grant. That's the grant that's funded at $225 per pupil for just under 1.1 million. A lot of the items that these grants are funding has already been discussed in the presentation. As you may imagine, a lot of technology, the personal protective equipment, the furniture that's been discussed. We also have a remote learning technology essentials grant. The application's been submitted. We're waiting to hear from the state on that, but we're expecting that to fund a portion of our Chromebook purchase. And then there's the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Act. This is the CARES Act allocation that we spoke of on numerous occasions at different school committee finance and regular meetings. And again, we expect this to be more on the academic side. There'll be funding for counseling, SPED, again, technology, furniture, all the other related costs to reopening and operations during the COVID crisis. As I mentioned, one thing that I would like to touch upon that's been brought up by both the superintendent and our SPED director As an example of costs that may exceed this funding is transportation. Christine and I have a meeting with our SPED vendor this week, again, to talk about what that will look like when we're in a hybrid model or, back full at some point. But with the social distancing, we can expect the need for additional vehicles, and as you may expect, additional costs. So that's something that's not factored in here and something that we would need to address going forward. The city is committed to provide additional financial resources, which, as I mentioned, the district is likely to need, and we're hopeful that the federal government and state government will also be providing additional funding for the educational needs throughout the country, but in particularly our district.
Great. Thank you, Director Gorski. Could I ask Susanna and Rebecca to please put your cameras on? Yes, Susanna.
Where's Rebecca?
Well, I want to do a big shout out. There they are. I want to do a big shout out to both of these incredibly intelligent and hardworking women. They have worked tirelessly, not only to pull together the report, which Rebecca came on to help us do, but then it always takes good partners to work together to bring it to a form that is totally understandable. And both of these guys have worked, tirelessly for the last 3 to 4 days to get both the PowerPoint and to get the written report in good shape. So public, thank you very much to both of you. You have managed to help us showcase and put our best foot forward for the team. So thank you both very, very much. And our last slide simply says about that our reopening plan will be available at that link at 5 o'clock on Wednesday, August 12th. As you know, there was a extension granted for all districts to August 10th to August 14th, but then for our district, it would actually be to the 17th because of our school committee meeting. Nonetheless, we're going to make it public on Wednesday by 5 so that you can read it and the public can read it as well. I think you'll find it's really comprehensive and it goes into deeper detail on many of the things that we covered tonight. Re-registration is going to go live. Regina, could you turn your camera on? Our queen of registration, Regina Bataldo, has worked really hard to once again get our registration system up and running. Regina, do you want to do a quick pitch for it?
Hi, good evening, everybody. So we will have the returning student registration next week. So every student in the Somerville Public Schools will receive a notification with a link to go online and update their student information, fill out the lunch application, update emergency contacts, update medical information on your student, what we have been doing for the past 4 years, and it's working wonderfully, and we are ready to kick off next week, on top of continuing registering new students as well. Thank you for the support from everybody.
Thank you, Regina, for all your hard work. Thank you. And then finally, for families who, after hearing more about our remote, all remote, full remote learning model that we'll be offering through LMS, and more of those details will be coming out later this week into the beginning of next week, we will open up a process starting the week of the 17th for families who want to opt out of the hybrid and into the full learning management system support. As well as for families who want to enroll their students in the Parks and Recreation of the Community Schools day program. Rosanna will be doing her normal process for her to 3 to 6 o'clock. That will continue. These here will be the free portion, no charge to the families for some of the activities we'll be doing during the day. Again, our goal is to really prioritize the pre-K to 2 and certainly our special education and English language. So with that, school committee, that is the conclusion of our presentation. We look forward to you reading our full report. We are happy to answer any questions. And we also just want to remind you that there may be changes between now and the time that we submit the final report to DESE, on which you will vote, and even after that. DESE does expect that. They have shared that with us, and we will always be as responsive as we can to the community, making sure our decisions are safe and to the best educational avenues for our students. So with that, any questions, we'd be happy to answer.
Before I will happily take questions from my colleagues, but before that, I really want to thank everyone who was here tonight. Every person that you saw. There's a multitude of other teachers, dean of students, facilitators, liaisons. I mean, the amount of people who have put huge amount of time, effort, and heart into creating this plan is phenomenal. And I know it's a long night, but I would happily take questions from school committee members, but also know we still have to take up the question of the revised calendar. So I have Laura, Ms. Patone.
Thank you, Chair Norman, through you to the superintendent. I could go on and on with the thank yous. Clearly, people have put in an extraordinary amount of work as well as research into putting this plan together. So I can't thank people enough for their efforts, and the city for their collaboration, and as well as all the outreach that's gone on. So I know Ms. Norman already covered this, but I can't help saying thank you, because it's just incredibly impressive in a short period of time. One thing that came up in the plan specific to our students with special needs was about having to basically revisit our IEPs, and making sure that we're going to make the appropriate modifications to meet the needs in whether it's fully remote or in the hybrid model. And clearly that's our intention. However, I'm concerned about having the capacity to do that. And what are your thoughts on, I look forward to hearing if there's going to be a need for more resources to make this happen. I'd be wanting to hear about that sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Great question. I'm sure Director Trevisoni would like to answer this one.
Thank you. Thanks, Lara. I think that, with it's liaisons, we're not rewriting the IEP. We're talking about how services and that will be provided slightly differently with synchronous and asynchronous and all those components to it. Somewhat similar to what we did in last year. I mean, not last year, in the spring, but we wanted to really be consistent and collaborative. I don't think at this point that we may need more special educators. I mean, I am looking at the possibility of contracting with some related service people and some people to help with testing. I would like for staff to be able to concentrate and work with parents and students. I think that's, we need to do the testing, but I think that for the most part, our OTs and our speech and language pathologists and all our related service staff really should be working with students. So we have already started to reach out to agencies to see if we can get some contracted support. As you can imagine, we are not the only people who are looking for contracted support. But we've already put our name out there to a bunch of agencies, and they know what we need, and as soon as we know. But if we do see in meeting with staff that we need something, I of course will let you know immediately.
Thank you. Other questions from school committee members? I know it's a lot to take in. Mr. Green and then Ms. Phillips.
Yes. So over the weekend, I've heard feedback from parents who are concerned that an emphasis on synchronous education means students staring at a Zoom screen for 5.5 to 6 hours a day. And what can you say about all the various ways in which synchronous education can happen that aren't 6 hours of staring at a screen, which may concern some parents?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll say my few thoughts, and then I'm sure Mr. Mazza might want to jump in. I mean, I think with synchronous, what we're talking about is activities that happen with the teacher, but other people. So this could be also where they're doing class activity, small group activity. They might leave the screen, come back onto the screen, or switch to a different platform. I think if, particularly we're at the point of being able to do some outdoor activities, that could easily be assignments for students to work socially distant outside, being able to do some of this, which would be live with one another or with a partner. Similarly, if we're at the point where we can use the tents, staff member can meet with the student, another way of doing something live. So I think there's a number of ways to be able to do it. Students, from the screen side, it can, I think it can also be, doesn't have to necessarily be the Chromebook device. This could also be where the students themselves are creating media, and that's live, and then they're just putting it back. So I think, it's really trying to think out of the box, and nobody thinks it's a good idea to be staring at the screen for that long. I think we're looking for the screen as a unifier to get the, sort of like you would to get the class going. There may be a portion of live instruction. And then really the idea is for students to be able to work on their own or in partners and then come back into the class. Mr. Mazza, I don't know if there's other things that come across your plate there.
Sure, yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So I think, one of the important pieces around project-based learning, hands-on learning, and shortened time blocks. So you have 20, 30 minutes of instruction, meeting, the synchronous lesson, and then kids go out and explore. If you remember when Dr. Q did her presentation, a lot of that exploration, learning by exploring, hands-on pieces that are outside, that are away from screens, and then you come back a little later and you discuss what you've learned. And then you go and you do something different. So, for us, it's about being creative so that nobody's staring at a screen for hours and hours and hours at a time. It's a combination of, in front of the screen, explore, do some hands-on learning, come back, let's discuss, let's, break off into a small group and do something. So I think there's opportunities for us to be really creative and to really think outside the box when we think about, synchronous instruction and the opportunities that students will have.
Yeah, there's also all kinds of abilities to use interactive programming. I'll use, for example, with CT, the virtual welders, where they may be using their phone for a portion of it, or they may be using a device for the portion of it. So it isn't necessarily all driven by the screen. So I think it's guided. I think that's another way to interpret the synchronous, is that it's really guided and being guided actively.
I have Ms. Phillips and then Dr. Ackman.
Thank you, Chair Norman. Through you to the superintendent, I think. First of all, thank you so much. I feel incredibly grateful to live in Somerville. I've said this again and again, but we have incredible leadership at our district level and at our city level, and I'm grateful to you and to the work you and your teams are doing. I have a question, and I think it's just related to taking me on a speed tour through a 60-page plan in half an hour and 45 minutes, but there's a particular group of my constituents that I don't yet see represented or supported in this plan, and I just want to tell you about them and see if they are represented, or if not, how they might be. And these are families who don't have a child in special education, who don't have an English language learner, who don't have kids in early education, but who have to work outside of the home and can't afford to pay for supplemental care. So these are older kids. I'm thinking in particular of a family that's got a 5th grader and 2 young high schoolers who are essentially going to be home alone every day. And I'm wondering how we're supporting those particular families with our plan.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I think for the older students, we're looking at like, some of what Summer Promise did this year, where there was a connection to the students during the schedule component, although remote. We're also looking at some other youth groups that we could potentially contract with, like parkour or like YMCA, that could actually bring the students out in social distance, but to be able to get them together. I'm sure at the high school level, we'll also, when it's safe, look at opportunities for internships for the students, or for the students to be able to work with the younger students, which is a powerful model too. Those are things that we're going to be looking at and trying to put together. I think, in general, the priority with the pre-K to 2 is it's a double whammy. A, they can't be alone, and they really struggle with the remote. So to address them first is appropriate. It doesn't mean that the older kids, seamlessly and beautifully file into the remote. So I think it comes down to, in many ways, being able to stretch that schedule. And I think that's what you saw with the high school, kind of following those 3 classes one week and then the next 3 the other week. There's a definite amount of work that the students could be doing either together or to be doing asynchronously, and then getting their fair share of the live classes. So I think really the goal with the schedules is to try to keep the students as oriented and focused as possible. And that will help the parents as well, that aren't able to sort of be there that whole time saying, we must do it. I think you also noticed that 5th and 6th grade were included as part of the phase. Really all the way up through the end of middle school. And hopefully if we can get to that point where the virus markers and the other stuff taken care of, we're back into a situation where even for those, we have some opportunities for those in person as well.
Dr. Phillips, I wanted to thank you for the reminder of the amount of information we've gotten, and there will be more coming when you get the report. And I would encourage all school committee members, as you're reading the report, so that we can use our time as efficiently as possible on Monday, because there will be a lot of ground to cover, to send any of your questions to me and to the superintendent, not to any of your colleagues, just to the 2 of us, so that we can ensure that they get answered at the meeting on Monday, and that we're prepared to answer all questions.
Norman, just one more thing to Dr. Phillips' question that I thought of, and I see Mr. Mazza has his hand. The other thing is, we haven't even started to talk about Greater Boston Breakthrough, Citizen Schools, Calculus Project, all the debate league, all of the ones that we've brought in who intend to continue to work with our students. So those will all be coming, as it will be BAM for the Healy School and for the high school as the beginnings of it. So my hope is for the students that we're identifying that there's a program that can kind of help pair with them to be able to give some structure and support for them. So, and then I saw Mr. Mazza had his hand up. Ms. Norman.
Yeah, sorry, it just felt weird to put my hand up, but just really quick on that point, I think that speaks to the importance of really when we're onboarding as we get back into school, the creating of relationships with kids and reaching out, and the frequent contact that we have, whether it might not be on a daily basis, but at least a weekly, and counselors are checking in, and we're offering social emotional supports for students, especially students that aren't necessarily part of the priority groups, because we want to make sure that we're reaching out and we're supporting them just as much as we're supporting everybody else. So, for us, those relationships and the building of those are crucial elements to make sure that students stay engaged.
Thank you. Dr. Ackman?
Hi. First, I wanted to thank everyone for this work. I am beyond impressed and really excited to push this out to our community for feedback. One of the things I wanted to say, which it's probably more of a comment than a question, but the win time, the what I need time, I think it's something that I've seen creeping in more and more, and I see a lot of value as an education researcher. I've seen schools that have used it, and the market improvement in students' knowledge, and especially one of the things that I would encourage Margaret, and then if other schools take it, give students ownership over that. When when students own their data and can really use that time productively, they find it so meaningful and they engage more in learning. And I know that we're looking for lots of ways to keep them engaged. So that's just my like 2 cents. And again, thank you.
It's great. That's a great. You always give really good things to think about. So this is definitely something that I think we've seen be a game changer in project-based learning, and certainly competency-based. But it is also one of the things that we're excited about with our staff, to be able to give them some time to think about what does meaningful assessment look like in an all remote, so that the kind of information that they're getting back, the kind of assignments that are being given, and then the kind of dialogue that they're having with students and families all sort of reinforces that feeling of kind of the deeper learning and engagement. So that will definitely be part of the conversations that we'll continue to have with colleagues in collaboration.
Are there any other Ms. Krepchen?
Just a quick reiteration of the thanks that everyone has been giving. My question is just to try to really understand the difference that we're talking about with the synchronous versus asynchronous, and parents who are saying at the beginning of the year that they need to be fully remote for the whole year. So they will essentially be in a separate track from the students that are saying they'd like to be in hybrid and come to school when they possibly can. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, so this is a good question. I think what we're trying to do is delineate that the full remote offerings from the state that we are still investigating, they're very different as LMSs than being with teachers that you know that are teaching SPS curriculum in our scope and sequence in a hybrid all remote to start model. And I think what we're sort of saying to parents is, everything's all remote to start. See if you can start with that and be able to work with that. And you certainly will have the opportunity, if and when we're able to come back in person, if you need to make a different decision and you need to use the LMS. But we really do want them to try to use the hybrid to begin with. Because we do feel like for English language learners, for our special education, even for students who just are not easily motivated or independent workers, having a relationship with a person makes a difference. We're looking closely at the LMSs. Edgenuity, we're pretty positive would be the offering at the high school level, because that's what we've been using. But we're really looking at both TECA and Florida Virtual. And then looking at what would be the human supports that we would need to put in place around these to also help support our students who would be going full remote. It wouldn't be the same as what we're able to do doing the hybrid in-person or phased-in approach, starting on remote. But we do believe that it warrants having some staff that would be dedicated to that full remote system for the year. But we need to look at numbers. We need to look at how many of the parents are interested in that. We've heard from some parents that they want to do like podding, and in doing podding, they kind of want to make their own schedule. They don't necessarily want to follow the schedule of a teacher. And so it may well be that for them, where they've already built in some extra supports academically, that the full remote works well for them, and with little assistance. What we're most concerned about would be the students who don't necessarily have those supports. And then the question is, what are the supports that we're going to need to build in for them, and how exactly do we do that? So once we get through sort of this initial evaluation this week of TECA and Florida Virtual, I think we'll have a better idea as to which of those systems we think more closely aligns to the work we do. Each of those systems comes with potentially some different ranges of live support, but it's, again, fairly minimal. So we, again, feel like we would have to complement that with somebody from SPS to help with that. So that's what we're working on right now to look at. Yeah. So that's I guess what I would say is, if at all possible, let's try the hybrid, phased hybrid. starting with the all remote. But if a parent 100% knows, like, my kid's not coming back, we're going to do this with these 10 kids, we're doing a pod for the year, we really can't follow a schedule, then it could well be the LMS is their solution, and then we'll work with them to make that work. This grading component, the attendance component, to make sure that they remain in SPS.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments tonight on the Mr. Green and then Dr. Ackman?
I had a little technical difficulty there. I just wanted to highlight the degree to which this plan reflects what we have heard from the community, what we have stated our values from the beginning, and it really draws the two. One of the things you've heard is that everyone's right? Like, our teachers are right that our buildings are not safe to enter to begin the year, right? Our teachers are right to say that we need to make sure that that schools are safe, right? And our parents who've been saying it are also right when they say that our kids need to be back in school, back in person as soon as possible. And so I think I want to just highlight the degree to which the plan reflects the reality of not going into our buildings before it's safe, but is geared towards the massive investment of resources we've already made and will continue to make into making them safe for students and staff and families as quickly as possible. Because we all know that's what's best for students. And so I want to reflect just how much work has already been done and will continue to be done in conjunction with the district, with the city, with the STA, to do what we all know is best for students, which is to keep them out while it's not safe, and to make it safe to get back as soon as possible.
Thank you. And someone else out there, was it Dr. Ackman? Thank you.
Yes, what I have to say is not nearly as eloquent. I'm wondering if we've gotten any guidance from DESE for families, because you talked about, registration with SBS. If there are families that, move out of like they still have a home in Somerville, they're fortunate enough to have another space to go to, and they choose to go that, like, do we have any guidance? Are there conversations about what that would mean? Does that question make sense?
It does, as if they're staying like in a second home for that period of time.
Yeah, whether it's still in state, out of state, like, has DESE offered guidance on what our obligations are?
Not quite. I mean, it would be through the enrollment. It would be through the enrollment tracker, and we will ask that question. There hasn't been anything I've seen that's come through specifically on assignment in this area.
Okay,
so
thank you.
I will ask.
Dr. Ackman, thank you so much for asking a question about enrollment, because part of this we will also need to have rules, the subcommittee which you chair, look at the question of, this is what we're, the title may evolve, but sort of an emergency student leave of absence. If a family isn't able to participate, makes another choice for this very unusual year, with the hope that next year will be, we will be back to a more normal. And how do you keep those students connected to the school system? So we will be asking rules to consider that question and how to come up with some sort of policy about enrollments. And my guess is there will be other questions of policy to address this very unusual situation that we're in, that we had. So rules committee people, you're going to be busy. Superintendent, do you want to say something?
I would just ask if we could really expedite this piece, because I do think it is one of the considerations that as families are making choices. I think you've heard me say that I believe that if we're looking through the lens of what's best for students and families, keeping them with their original community that they may have been with for years in school is the right thing to do under these circumstances. So it would be a 1-year waiver from our normal enrollment and discharge policy to allow them to be able to keep that seat. And I think for us, that would mean pre-K all the way up. So I think that is, if we talk about sort of what's best for kids, that in my mind, given all the uncertainty, would be important for them to know the certainty is that they can go back to the school that they love.
Yes, I think any way we can help students and families navigate this very unusual time, I would ask you, Dr. Ackerman, to consider if there's scheduling a meeting, if not for this week, then sometime next week. I think
Can I ask a clarifying question about that?
Yes.
What are the rules around how we have to post it if we find time this week?
Oh, so open meeting law will say it needs to be posted at least 48 hours in advance. So if something was to be posted tomorrow, the earliest you could do it would be Thursday.
Okay.
And you could work with Ms. Santiago on that. That would
Thank
be
you.
very helpful. Thank
Yep.
you so much. Are there other questions or comments on this? And remember that 5 o'clock on Wednesday, the full proposal. I would like to, at 9:40, I'd like to shift gears and look at the calendar for next year. Superintendent Skipper, can you frame the question for us?
This is actually Mr. Maz's favorite topic right now.
Mr. Maza.
Is the school calendar. So he has done such a wonderful job. I'm going to turn this over to him to tell you.
Mr. Maza,
Okay.
the floor is yours.
Of course you are. Thank you. I appreciate it. Hang on. Let me call it up here if I can find it. In my, here we go. So basically, and I actually think I can share my screen, can't I? Would you like me to do that?
Sure, and also for anyone who is at home and wants to, it's also in the handouts. It's the second one down. Thank you for closing off the other screens. So, thank you.
You mean me?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I have a bad habit of leaving 14 screens open. All right, can you see that?
Yes, that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. I love when it's beautiful. So basically, what we needed to do is to really take into account the 10-day approved planning training for the return to school with professional development, those kind of things that we talked about earlier, which means we had August 31st and September 1st was on the original calendar. We kept those as professional development days, as we normally would. And so then you see what's in red. Those are the 10 days that we would be using with that DESE approved planning and training period. So our first day of school for grades 1 through 12 would be September 18th. And below that, the 25th would be our first day of school for pre-K and kindergarten students.
Okay, so the addition, so the 2 days, we normally have that Monday and Tuesday before Labor Day. Instead of students coming back typically that Wednesday before Labor Day, would be 2 days, those would become PD days. That Friday before Labor Day is still a day. We're closed.
Correct.
Monday, Labor Day, we're closed. And then
Correct.
the next, the way we got to the 18th is by having those 2 days we already had, the 31st and the 1st, and then adding 10 more days of professional development. Did I get that right?
Correct. The other thing we did is we took a few days from each of the quarters to make them more similar as far as the number of days per quarter, because the first quarter, was really off with the late start. So if you look down at the bottom where the quarters are, I mean, they're between 43 and 42 days, which is more appropriate, when we're talking about grading and assessments and, participation and things. It just makes more sense.
So then this I just want to say everything maybe twice, just so that everyone understands that normally the DESE requires us to have 180 days of instruction with students, with 10 more days devoted to PD. That number is now down to 170. So
Correct.
that's okay. And so then of those 170 days, you divided them up into quarters so that they're relatively the same number of days, but they would not fall in the same usual markers. I think I saw, did I see Mr. Green's hand up? I will take any questions. Mr. Green.
So I have a question, and then I'm also going to move to approve because we know we're going to approve it. My question is half day Wednesdays. And this maybe may have one question I should have asked during the last presentation, but how are we doing half day Wednesdays during full remote?
Yeah, so I mean, during full remote, half day Wednesdays is going to be a lot of asynchronous for the students anyways. So that will be an opportunity, like for instance, we're offering through rec throughout the city, different opportunities, community schools. So that will just give the kids an opportunity to be able to do more on that day. I think, you know, we're leaving them on the calendar with the thought that, you know, were we to be able at some point to come back, we would go forward and readjust those. But right now they don't really make too much of a difference in that they're just going to be extra time for the students to be able to do other kinds of events. The other thing I wanted to point out is that Juneteenth Day is now a state holiday. It does fall on a Saturday. So we have not gotten guidance yet whether, like, when it will be actually celebrated. So it could be once we're trying to confirm this between the state and the city. So once we can get confirmation on that, it will either just be marked in the calendar as to what it is, but does not impact the calendar, or if we find that there's an actual observance day, much like it would be like Independence Day, then we will need to make a further adjustment to reflect it. So that was the only other thing that we wanted to bring up to you.
Thank you so much. Is there a second? There is a motion by Mr. Green, seconded by Dr. Ackman. Is there any discussion? Ms. Santiago, can we get a roll call, or its superintendent, whoever does a roll call at this meeting? Thank you so much.
Dr. Phillips.
Yes.
Ms. Krepshin.
Yes.
President McLaughlin. Mayor.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Ms. Barish.
Yes.
Stone.
Yes.
Dr. Ackman.
Yes.
And Ms. Norman.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you so much for that. That now concludes the report of the superintendent as we close in on 10 o'clock. Are there any items from board members? Hearing none, I move to adjourn this meeting. Thank you so much for a long and informative night.
Just wait for Wednesday. That report comes out.
Party on.
Guys.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Good night.